Did you know that you can do binding on the Longarm?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to teach you how to do that today.
Yeah.
So Kim, show us a couple of the tools that you like to use with binding.
Definitely. So the number one thing that I always like to use with when I'm binding is the square feet. And I use the smaller one here. That's the 1/4 inch one. That's the one that I prefer to use. There has been a couple times where I've actually had requests from customers that I have used the 1/2 inch one to do a wider binding, but personally I like the narrower binding. So I use the square feet.
So the 1/4 inch, that's from the needle to the edge of the foot.
To the edge of the foot.
So you're getting a 1/4 inch seam allowance.
Yep. And we have that set up on the machine, and we'll show you a really nice, we've got it set up here. And it's just nice because you've got straight edges along there to stitch along. And the really nice thing is I can actually even use a ruler with it. So you guys can see I can slide a ruler right up there, and I can use a ruler along the edge of the square foot. A nice straight one.
Yes.
Now, I don't want to go in any directions but vertical or horizontal, because if I try to do, crossways, I guess.
Yeah, diagonally, you don't get that.
It doesn't work so well.
That butting up of the ruler with the foot very well.
Exactly. So using a ruler is a great thing. The other couple of tools that I like to use is a channel lock, which, you know what? We forgot to grab one, just the little C channel locks. You can use those. The electromagnetic channel locks are really great too if you have those, or channel lock on the Pro Stitcher. Now, another way that you can also do it with the Pro Stitcher is just having your gears engaged. It's a little easier to keep that line nice and straight. But when you're binding on the Longarm, the one caveat is I would never recommend binding a quilt that's going to be like a show quilt or something fancy, even like a wall hanging that's going to hang on the wall, because I want to make sure those ones are really, really square, that the quilt has been squared before we apply the binding, because we're not doing that here. We're actually applying it before we take it off the frame. Yeah. So I'd like to do this on baby quilts, any kind of utility quilt, meaning a quilt that's going to be used like on your bed, a couch quilt, those kind of quilts.
Yeah. I have heard of people doing show quilts and doing the binding on it.
I have too.
But you have to be really confident that you are getting that quilt completely square while you're stitching.
Yeah.
If this is a quilt that you're going to have to trim it up to get it square, you probably don't want to be doing the binding on the Longarm.
Exactly. So. Exactly.
Okay.
So yeah, we decided we're going to show you the whole process from doing this here on the Longarm, and then we've actually got a domestic machine set up. We're going to show you how to trim the edges. It's the whole process. We always talk about, one of our taglines, finish more quilts. Isn't that what it is? I can't remember. Yeah.
Well, we're going to finish a quilt today.
We're going to completely finish a quilt, the final steps of finishing a quilt, not just quilting it. Yeah. So first of all, this is a quilt that Christina made. You want to tell us about it? It's just
somebody actually just gave me a bag of fabric, and
nice.
This quilt top was already in there, already made. So I said, this will be a quick one that we can demo on. And there was extra fabric that I could make the binding out of.
Perfect. And what size of binding is this?
I actually cut that at 2.5 inches.
Okay, and then it's pressed. It's pressed in half. And it's all ready to go. So you guys can see that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we've gotten to the bottom of the quilt. Christina did an edge to edge on it, as everybody can see here. So I'm going to set these over here to the side. And I am going to start applying the binding here at the bottom. So I'm going to line up the edge of the cut edge of the binding with the bottom of the quilt. And one thing to note, Christina has done a baseline here, which is nice and straight. I can see that she actually used her channel locks. So let me ask you this. When you put the binding on the Longarm, do you line up the binding with the actual edge of the quilt, or do you line it up with that straight line?
Generally, I line it up with the edge of the quilt.
Okay.
If, however, my quilt has some seams where one piece of fabric sticks out a little bit more than the other, sometimes I will do a straight line and just line it up with that straight line and trim it off.
Use the basting line to line it up with. Okay, so on this one actually looks pretty straight. So we'll just start down here at the bottom. Now I don't want to start stitching right at the edge of this because I want to be able to join the two pieces together. So I'm actually going to start a little bit in. Let's go ahead and move the machine over here. I'm gonna start a little bit in, a few inches. 6 or 8 inches is what I usually like to do. Now, another question that we usually get at this point is, why aren't you applying the binding as you go? Well, because then you have that extra stack of fabric along the edges as you roll it up, and your quilt, you may not be able to keep the tension nice and tight on your quilt as you go. Yeah. So it's actually best to do it this way. Okay, so I just brought my thread up from the bottom, and I'm gonna go ahead and do a quick tie off so that my fabric, everything's secure there. And I do have my machine set, it is in cruise. I'm in a low cruise, I'm at like 100. And I do have it set with the needle down. That way, anytime I stop, nothing's gonna move. Everything's gonna stay in a nice straight line.
Excellent.
Okay, and I'm just gonna go ahead and start stitching. And I am going to keep the edge of that foot lined up with the edge of that binding.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you a question here. We talked about channel locks, but I noticed you're not using channel locks. No. What are you doing? What's your technique right now?
So right now, I do have a Pro Stitcher on this machine, so I have my gears engaged.
Okay.
So that's how I'm just using that a little bit to help me keep this straight. Because you guys can see that I'm actually stitching quite slowly, I'm moving slowly enough that even if I didn't have my gears engaged, I'd be okay.
Yeah.
So I'm coming up here to the corner. You guys can see the corner of the quilt is right here. So what I'm going to do is take this very edge of the foot right there, that little square edge there, right to the edge of the quilt, and then I'm going to stitch off this way a little bit so I can fold that binding over.
So you're going to a 1/4 of an inch of the edge of the quilt.
And then I'm going to pull this forward and stop so it's out of the way. Okay, so I left that 1/4 inch space between the from the corner of the quilt. And then I'm going to go ahead and fold my binding so that I get that nice miter as I get going. Now, a little point here. I know it's a little hard for you guys to see. When I get up to one of the other corners where the camera angle is a little better, you guys will be able to see. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and start driving this forward. Now, just a little note. Sometimes as you're getting that foot back up onto this extra thick piece of binding, sometimes you need to stop and just lift that foot up and tuck the fabric underneath it. Don't be afraid to do that.
Good point.
So now I'm just going to go ahead and stitch up the side, keeping the edge of the binding aligned with the foot there.
So you're using the edge of the square foot to line up with the edge of the fabric, which is lined up with the edge of the quilt top.
Yes, that's a lot of edges, isn't it?
It is.
But it's a nice straight line. And I'll stitch as high as I can, as far away from me as I can in that throat space. And actually that's about as far as I can go. And I'm gonna leave the needle down, and then we're gonna go ahead and advance. So Christina, if you wanna help me, we'll undo the cables here on the sides. And then we're going to just do it back. And we have taken the top of the quilt. It's not attached to that top leader anymore. So, and we'll just roll this forward until the machine, as far as the machine can go, it's about right there. I actually have to go back just a little bit. We've got a little bit of extra pull there on that. So if you want to, there we go, yeah. We'll tighten up the back. We'll go ahead and head up the rest of the way here. So I'm just going to do a little adjusting. We'll put our side clamps back on, keep that fabric nice and in place where it should be. And I'm just going to keep stitching up that side. Okay, and once again, hit the top of my throat space. Well, this isn't even advancing. This is devancing? I don't know.
So I know that
there's good.
We'll get some questions from people of why are you just doing one side at a time?
Yeah.
Because we've got one round of binding. So it's easier just to kind of go back and forth rather than doing one throat space. Because some people like to start at the middle of their binding.
Yeah.
We started at the tail.
Yep.
So.
Well, the other thing is I don't like to have to clip my thread.
Yeah.
For me, it's easier just to do it all the way.
It's quicker to advance.
I'm going to come up here to the edge and then sew off to the side. And this time it'll be a little easier for you guys to see. So I lined up the edge of the foot right here with the top edge of the quilt, and I stopped a 1/4 inch away. If you want to be fancy, you can absolutely do a little diagonal stitch right there. It's just easier to not do that right now, especially when I'm trying to talk and do it at the same time. And this time, I'm just going to hold that there. I've got that nice little sharp corner, and I'll come back across, and I'll show you guys here. Sometimes getting back up onto that fabric can be a little hard. So once again, don't forget, you can just pop that hopping foot up and tuck that fabric underneath there just a little bit. Just make sure your machine's stopped anytime you make those kinds of adjustments. So, okay, we're gonna stitch across the top here. Have Christina help me keep everything nice and lined up. And as I'm coming to a corner again, I'm going to come to that corner and drive up off the edge of it, stitch up off the edge. Once again, do that fold.
And there's no magic number for how far you have to go off. It's just getting the machine out of the way so you can get that binding folded to get that mitered corner.
Exactly. And then we'll go ahead and come back down as far as we can in that throat space. And we'll stop again, and we'll advance it this time. This isn't advancing. Get that as far as we can. We'll go ahead and do some stitching there.
Do you want your clamps on?
Yeah, if you want to put them on that side. To be perfectly honest, sometimes I don't worry so much about the clamps when I'm doing the binding.
Especially when you're advancing so often.
Yeah. So we'll go to the edge of that throat space, and then let's go ahead. We've got one more small advance here. We've only got just a few more inches we need to finish stitching. And then we'll do around that other corner, the last corner here. So, all right, we're gonna come on down to that corner. Stitch off the edge, fold it again, make that nice sharp corner, and I didn't stitch quite far enough. I'm going to go over just a little bit more. Do that one there, and we'll just head back over this way. Now, this is the bottom, and I'm going to stop. I'm going to go a few inches more. I usually leave 6-8 inches in between the ending point of the first one and the last one here. So at this point, I would go ahead and do another tie off, and then I would raise my needle, and let's go ahead and clip those threads, and then I will pull this quilt off the frame and trim it up.
Okay, just so our viewers know,
Yeah.
when we say we're putting the binding on the long arm, we're just attaching the binding to the front of the quilt. We're not doing the joining at where the two ends come together. And we are not attaching it to the back of the quilt on the long arm.
Nope.
So that leads us into our next step. So we're going to move over to a domestic machine, and we'll show you what to do from this point.
Exactly. So at this point, we'd unload the frame, and we'd have the quilt, and we're ready to go ahead and trim it. The really nice part about attaching the binding this first time all the way around, it's one less time that I have to run that quilt through my domestic machine, right?
Correct.
Especially on those really big projects. So.
Exactly.
All right, well, let's move over to our other setup over here.
Sounds good. We're back and ready for the next step. So Kim, you've got a different quilt here.
Yeah.
You're going to show us the next steps.
Yeah. So I actually have a smaller quilt here that I did put the binding on the long arm. So I want to give you guys a couple tips when you're trimming this up, because as you can see, I've got a lot of, the normal extra that you have, but the binding's on here. So you have to be a little mindful of a few things. So I'm going to start over here on this edge, and then I'm also going to show you how I attach the two pieces of binding. So first I want to trim everything. It's really important you make sure that your extra binding is inside the quilt and not outside the quilt, so you don't accidentally cut something. You laugh, but I've done it before. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. So I'm going to line up the edge of my ruler right along the edge of my binding. But when I come to a corner, so I want you guys to really pay attention here. I want to make sure that I don't accidentally cut along the edge of this little folded piece of fabric, okay? So I will, Christina, if you could hand me a pin, I will actually pin this back a little extra out of the way so that I don't accidentally trim something I don't want to. So I'm just going to line that up and trim along that edge just with a rotary cutter.
Using proper rotary cutter safety.
Exactly. And then I'm going to turn it. And when I turn it, to make sure things are nice and square, I'm going to line up the edge of this quilt here with the first inch line here. And then that gives me a nice square corner here. So I'll line that up and go ahead and trim along this edge, and then just slide this down and do the same thing on the other corner. So I'm going to grab my pin, move it over, pin that down again, and just keep going.
Just make sure the pin's out of the way of your rotary cutter.
Yes. I don't want to have to replace my rotary cutter because I just put a nick in it. We've all done it. Do my other corner here. This is just a little sample that we've quilted here in the studio that I'm trimming up here. This actually was quilted by one of our educators. Mm-hmm. I believe that Iris did this, Iris Neutslave.
So, one of our field educators.
Mm-hmm. They were just here for a training, so she did that. Go ahead and trim up this corner. And then we'll flip it and do the other side. Lining things up as I go. One more corner down here. Go ahead and move that pin down again. Kind of hold that out of the way.
And this is a panel from Riley Blake.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the exact name of it, but we'll find that and put it in there.
Yeah.
And it's a quarter of the panel.
Right.
So we had it split up for training.
So I am making sure that both of these extra pieces of binding are pulled back out of the way. And then I'm going to go ahead and just trim that the rest of the way, lining up that edge there so that I get a nice square edge. Okay. So now I've got this quilt, this little mini quilt, all trimmed up. Now I need to bring these two pieces together. And there's a lot of different ways to do this, isn't there, Christina?
There are.
So you can, I know that some people like to do different fold methods. I'll show you how I do it. This is just the way that I learned it originally. So it's the way I always do it. So I take this side and I fold it back about halfway within the space that I have right here from where it's not stitched. And then I bring the other side over and match the two up. It'll be interesting to see, Christina, what you think of my method here.
Yeah, I've never seen it this way.
So I fold both of those so that they just match up like that. Then I'm going to grab some pins and I just take and put a pin right where that little fold is right there. So I put a little pin through there. And then I do the same thing on the other side. There's probably simpler ways to do this, but like I said, one of the very first how to quilt classes I took, this is how the gal showed us how to do it, so I've just always done it this way. Then I take and open these up, and because I just put that pin through that little bit, it will actually lay flat on the cutting mat there. So I'm going to open that up on both sides and lay them both out flat straight this way. Then I'm going to take my ruler that has a 45-degree line on it, and I'm just going to line that up. And I'm going to eyeball it so that it is roughly 1/4 inch away from that pin. And the pin, because it's not stuck through very much fabric, it's easy to just kind of move out of the way. So as quilters, we're pretty good at eyeballing 1/4 inch. So, and then I just cut it. And I make sure I use the same angle, the ruler turned at the same 45-degree angle on the second one too. So let's bring this over here. And once again, I'm just making sure I'm 1/4 of an inch away from, you guys can see the pin. The pin blends in a little bit more on this fabric, but it's just there. So I cut that, and I'll hand that extra binding to you.
Oh,
and then
thank you.
I take just a little bit off the corner here so that it's come up 1/4 of an inch so that it's flat, so I don't have an extra little ear sticking out there. Do you ever do that on yours? Trim little bits away?
I use a completely different
method.
technique, so mine come off later on.
Okay. So then I just take my 2 pieces, and I have to fold the quilt, put a little bit of a fold in the quilt, and then I will pin them and sew them together. And then when I get all done, you can't tell where you started or stopped because it's exactly the same cross-cut connection on all of the pieces. So then I just do a 1/4 inch seam across here, which I can actually show you because we've got a domestic machine set up. And then I'll press everything out, and on the domestic machine, we'll just stitch this last little bit down. And then we'll show you a couple different ways to flip that binding. So Christina and I are going to play musical chairs here real quick. We'll do a little switch. I'll come over here. This is our Stitch 510. I love this machine. It's a straight stitch machine. And I do have a 1/4 inch foot on it. So it's got the little guide here on the corner, which is nice. I don't have to try to eyeball or line anything up. It actually shows it. It's easy. You just butt the fabric up against it. So, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and stitch across here. And I'm going to set it up so my needle stays down when I get done. And just go ahead and stitch the rest of the way across, do a little bit of a back tack there, cut my threads.
I love that it has the button that you can cut your threads with.
I know, it's one of my favorite features. Now, right here, if I'm feeling really fancy, I'll go over to my iron. But usually I'm too lazy by this point, and so I just use my fingers. And I do press this open. Do you press your seams open on your binding?
I do on my binding, yes.
Yeah, I do too. So I do that, and then I will just do another quick, lay that down where it belongs, and just do another quick finger press along this edge here. That was already pressed before, so it's easy to just remind the fabric where it needs to be. Now I'm just going to go ahead and stitch this down from here to here, the little bit that I didn't. And that's the only part of that first, I always call them laps. The first lap of the binding, that's the only part that I actually have to do on the domestic machine. So, and I got a little bit of a fold there, but that's going to be on the back side. And when I fold it over, there's no fold, so it's totally fine, right?
Yep.
So let's talk about some different ways to go from here. Or do you have anything else to add to that?
So that part that you just did with joining those 2 tails, it is possible to do that on the long arm.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more involved, so we didn't want to walk through those steps. But for some of our more advanced quilters, yes, I know some of you do that on your long arm. It is possible.
Yeah.
But most of us will probably just come to our domestic machine and whip it out real quick. So
it's easier for me. I know that I've actually tried doing it on the long arm a few times, and I've always cut the binding wrong. And then I have to go and try to put an extra little piece in there. So like I said, this is the method that I learned 20 years ago when I first started quilting. And so I've just always stuck with it because I didn't want to have to relearn anything.
Yep.
So let's talk about some different ways that we finish the quilt from here.
Okay.
So we've got options. We can, because really all we need to do is take this binding and then flip it over. And if we can just kind of finger press that. And somehow we have to get that sewn down. So there's a few options. Let me show you a couple different ways to do it on the sewing machine first, and then we can talk about how to do it, hand stitching it down on the back. And I use all of the different methods. So one way you can do it, and one thing I do recommend, if you've quilted this with a thread that can handle it, I will always take this to my iron and I will iron it out nice and flat before I actually start doing my binding. And if I'm feeling really ambitious, I will even fold it over and press it like that And then if I'm feeling even more ambitious, I will get my glue stick out and I will actually glue stick and do it down. I especially do that on hand projects that I'm going to like take on vacation with me or anything like that, because then I don't have to take any wonder clips or pins or anything like that to hold stuff in place. So for right now, we're just going to do it the simple way. Finger press. I'm going to fold it over. And there's a couple different, actually there's multiple ways that you can stitch this down. One is to actually do a stitch in the ditch right there next to the binding. And when we do the stitch in the ditch, what you want to do is match your thread to actually the background color of the quilt. And if you do that stitch in the ditch just right in there, it disappears. And often people will think that at least from the front, they'll think that your quilt is hand bound on the back. They won't realize that it's actually that way. So let me do a little bit of stitching like this, if I can get it to move over as much as I need it to. There we go. So I'm actually stitching in that ditch. And that will just go ahead and catch that. So I'll just do a little bit of that. And you can see that just completely, like you can't even see it.
Yeah, it just blends on that front side.
It just blends on the front side. However, when you flip it over on the back, you can see that there's a stitch line there. Now, there's also the way of stitching just right along the edge of the binding. So I'll stitch a little bit of this so you guys can see. You know, I'll actually come down here to the turquoise part. The thread I'm using will probably contrast just a little bit more here. So I can stitch right along the edge here. And if I maintain, I'll just do a little bit of that. If I maintain that distance the whole way, you can see how there's that stitch just right off the edge of the binding. And it looks really good. This is actually really good to do too if you do the faux piping binding, because then it makes that inside part pop a little bit. So that's something to look at.
Excellent.
Now, Christina has a couple of other ways that we can do this, both with the machine and by hand. She's got some good examples.
And I'm going to hand this over to you so you can put it in the camera.
Absolutely.
So this one was bound on the domestic machine on the backside, but I don't like having the little flap showing on the back. So I like to use a decorative stitch. This one's just kind of a squiggle, and it covers the binding, holds it nice and flat, and just adds a little extra detail to it.
Yeah. I know that my grandma, who actually taught me how to do binding, she had a sewing machine that had like, I don't know, 85 different decorative stitches on it. And she would always tell us, no, you can't use that decorative stitch. You need to use a different one. I haven't used this one yet. Let's use this one on this quilt. So it was really fun because she was bound and determined to use all those decorative stitches. So I think that's a great idea to do. And it actually adds a little extra detail, especially fun on baby quilts, things like that. So that's a good one. Okay.
The other one is when we stitch by hand. So this one, I've started working on the binding.
Okay.
And you mentioned earlier having clips. Just open this up a little bit.
Yep.
So this one, I've got the clips holding it in place. I've also used lots of barrettes.
Yeah, I've totally used those bendy barrettes.
Yep, they work just fine.
Yep.
So I've rolled it over from the front to the back and clipped it in place, and then I just hand stitch.
Oh, very nice.
So
and everybody always wants to see what the hand stitch looks like. They're always like, wait, what stitch do you do? It's basically a whip stitch.
Yeah, and there's different stitches that you can use. So I'll just show you the one I do. I try to keep it about 1/4 inch. So I'm going to go down into the backing, and then when I come up, I'm just going to barely grab onto that binding.
Okay. You know what? Why don't we bring that over here?
There?
Yeah. We're going to swap again. We're playing musical chairs today. Okay, so Christina, why don't you show us how you do that stitch? Some people call it a whip stitch. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but what's your method for hand stitching down that binding?
I'll show you my way. Again, it's not the right way or the wrong way, it's just my way. So I take my needle and I go down into the backing fabric and make sure I don't go through to the front, which I've done plenty of times. But when I come back up about 1/4 inch or so away, I'm just going to barely grab onto that binding fabric.
Oh, yeah, I see that there.
Okay.
Yep.
And depending on my thread and stuff, sometimes I'll take several stitches at once and then just pull it all through at the same time. If I've got thread that's not cooperating with me, then I'll do individuals.
Now, here's a question for you. Do you match your thread color to your binding or your backing?
I match mine to my backing.
Okay.
Or excuse me, to my binding.
Oh, okay. I was going to say that's what I do.
Yeah, to my, all those B words.
All those B words.
Yeah. I match it to the binding because the binding's where it's going to show just a little bit. And it's such a little tiny stitch that you're not going to see a ton of it. But if you've got a thread color that really contrasts, then yes, you will see that.
Yep. Exactly.
So I just pull that through, making sure I don't twist up my yarn or my thread.
And this is where I'm sure we're also going to get the question, what kind of thread do you like to bind with? I know me personally, I use my leftover bobbins for binding thread because when there's just a little bit left on that, especially the pre-wound bobbins, it's the perfect way to do it. So I usually bind with like a lighter weight thread, a 60 weight thread, just because that's what's on my bobbins. But I have used, just so I can match the color, I've used pretty much any type of thread. As long as it'll fit through the eye of my needle.
First thing I look for is the color so that it matches with the binding. The next thing is the weight of the thread. And I usually tend to go with, like you said, like a 60 weight, just because it just kind of pulls through really nicely.
Exactly.